What's up, guys? In this video we're going to look over a couple of Bitcoin miner charts. Many are now in the oversold region, starting to look actually like they're due for a bounce here. Haven't been talking about them that much in the last couple of days besides just a brief mention or something that I find interesting. You know, they totally depend on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's been in a downtrend. The Bitcoin miners have been showing a lot of weakness, and it's all about Bitcoin. Bitcoin needs to bounce here on its death cross that it recently posted. Bitcoin needs to reclaim its 50 MA on the weekly. It seems to be continuing to hit new recent lows. But let's talk about what's going on here on the spot ETF side. BlackRock's IBIT posts a record one-day outflow of $523 million, and the average spot ETF buyer is around a $90,000 cost basis. If we can't reclaim $90,000, it's possible that more of these spot ETF investors sell off, take their losses before the year ends. Tax harvest brings a further drop, more uncertainty, more fear. They saw $523 million in net withdrawals on Tuesday, even though its price rose more than 1% as Bitcoin gained above 93,000. Surprisingly, Grayscale's mini trust saw 139 million in inflows. Franklin Templeton's spot ETF saw 10 million inflow. And sadly, November has only brought 3 days of net inflows throughout the month so far. Bitcoin's now 30% from its October all-time high. Total net inflows since launch. If you think these spot ETFs were actually a bad thing for Bitcoin and there's just more manipulation, more volatility, that is not the case. Since launch, the net inflows stand at $58 billion. Every year, that's basically an average of $30 billion entering into Bitcoin. And people had fears of Mt. Gox with that $9 billion worth of selling. Here we have in a year about $30 billion because they have been around since 2024 of January. Bitcoin's definitely showing more weakness. Looks like it's going to hit a low. If it breaks this wick, we're likely to go lower, obviously. Bitcoin is now in the oversold territory. Like I said in the last video, you know, when Bitcoin's oversold like this, you usually want to take advantage. Right here, for example, we saw a bullish divergence along with being oversold. You saw higher lows, while the price showed lower lows that marked a bottom. The death cross also marked a bottom here. But you know, buying at oversold, also possibly waiting longer and looking for a divergence on the RSI tends to be a great opportunity. Like, yes, if you bought this oversold level, it did go lower, went from 78,000 down to 74,000, but in a short period you saw a massive rebound. Again, here you saw lower lows on the price. You saw the RSI hitting an equal low here on this bounce. This oversold of a Bitcoin, usually a buying opportunity. We are here with pretty much a similarly oversold Bitcoin. It doesn't happen often. In hindsight, if you're buying while oversold, here's another nice opportunity here in August of 2023. Another death cross that marked a bottom and seeing Bitcoin oversold. And again, in the absolute bear market of crypto winter, November 2022, December 2022, Bitcoin was $15,000. Also oversold. In hindsight, a great opportunity. And if you're avoiding buying Bitcoin when overbought, well, yes, it's okay to DCA, and in the long term it doesn't really matter. Just looking simply at the RSI and being like, okay, I'll wait here, instead of making my weekly purchase while Bitcoin's very overbought, I'll wait for a better opportunity. You know, you wouldn't have been buying Bitcoin at 111,000, you wouldn't have been buying at 123,000, you wouldn't have been buying at 125,000 if you're only buying when oversold. The last time you would have really bought Bitcoin was back here at like the 70,000s. Or I guess now at roughly 90,000. But you know, if you tend to buy when the RSI, especially on the daily or even the weekly, better yet, is oversold, usually it turns out to be a great opportunity. Buying into fear, not buying into greed. Selling into greed, trimming into greed, and buying into fear. It's very hard to do at times because when you're wrapped up in that excitement, it's hard to want to sell. You keep seeing a green day. Everyone is so happy about it. You start getting a little greedy. And then things eventually turn around and you're like, why didn't I sell more? The same can be said about the inverse. When Bitcoin's oversold, when people are fearful, when you're kind of like, I want to wait. Maybe Bitcoin goes down to 85. Maybe Bitcoin goes down to 70. You know, sometimes you got to take advantage and buy. Not only is Bitcoin oversold, but also the Bitcoin miners are pretty heavily oversold. You have CleanSpark here now in the oversold area. Last time it actually hit oversold was back here in February of 2025, which was actually in hindsight a great buying opportunity. You did see a bullish divergence as well. You saw the RSI hit a higher low. And you saw the price hit a lower low right here. You can see the bottom in the price was this second bounce on the RSI. And you also had a falling wedge pattern. You want to look for patterns. You want to look for support areas. You want to see what the RSI is doing. Look for divergences. Confluence is great in the market. More signs that we're going to get a bounce or more signs that we've topped out. And it does look like CleanSpark on a price perspective is trying to kind of bottom out here at the psychological 10, which was a previous resistance. Here, trying to reclaim the 200 MA, it looks like. Throughout this cycle, if you're buying CleanSpark when oversold, in hindsight, it was usually a great buying opportunity. Of course, we mentioned here in February, when we did go a little lower, from roughly 738 if you bought that oversold level to down to 646 or so. But shortly after that, you saw a nice run from the 6s to 13 and even higher. When else did you see CleanSpark oversold? Here at the 8s, and it did end up going lower, but before then it went higher. And before that, you saw CleanSpark near oversold September here at its low point in the 3s. And again, back in the crypto winter lows when it was in 2022, $1.70. Seeing it in these oversold levels tend to be good buying opportunities. Similarly with when it's overbought. Look at when it was $25 and there was a lot of excitement and the halving was taking place back in 2024. Look at what we saw. Not only bearish divergence once, but twice. We saw bearish divergence here, a lower high on the RSI, when we saw a higher high on the price, and it did drop after that. It did end up going higher later, and we saw another bearish divergence, lower highs on the RSI, higher high on the price, and we have never gone higher than this point here. Throughout all that time from 2024 halving, when we saw that bearish divergence, and people were probably picking this up here and wondering why they're down. But they weren't accumulating when oversold. They weren't accumulating when oversold. They weren't accumulating when oversold. Now looking at Bit Digital, BTBT, a similar song and dance. I don't know why I made this so small. I'm sorry. We've got BTBT reaching oversold here. I think in a previous video, maybe a couple of days ago, I talked about this possible $2 level that BTBT is heading towards. It does look like we're still heading there. This will be, in my opinion, a good opportunity to add some BTBT. We saw a double top here. We also saw overbought territory. We did get a golden cross, which did bring a bounce shortly after. But now we have the 50 MA and the 200 MA kind of pointing down in a bearish way. We also did get BTBT's earnings recently. They posted a surprise profit when it was anticipated to be a loss. Very in line with their revenue. They're anticipating another loss, but we could always see a surprise profit again, depending on what Bitcoin does to end the year. But in hindsight, buying BTBT when oversold. Look here, we saw a bullish divergence. We saw the RSI hit a higher low, price went lower. You're picking up around this point, even from the 220 area down to 168. It did end up going massively higher. We topped out at about 450 here. And another thing is we had a trend that we were following. We were bouncing on this ascending line. We did break it, and we saw a reaction on that along with breaking the 200 MA. I do think seeing a bounce here at $2 would be very encouraging. You might want to wait to see it actually try to establish support, not just see this falling knife continuing to fall. But the Bitcoin miners are starting to look attractive, in my opinion, for the first time in a while. All right, now Iron. Iron is not yet at oversold yet. It has had a pretty hard sell-off, but it is not yet oversold on the daily. Iron is down now 41% from its highs. And many of you know I wasn't the most bullish on Iron in recent time. To be fair, I wasn't really bullish on it in the, high 20s, 30s, and 40s. So I did miss out on some of this run. But, I was pointing out these bearish divergences left and right, how overbought we were on the chart, how we broke out of a cycle-long pattern we were in. Typically, you want to trim when we were at the top line of this pattern. Throughout the whole cycle, it played out in a great way. Selling when overbought here, when at the higher line on this trend it was following, buying when at the support area on this line, riding it all the way up throughout the cycle. Now it might even use this line as a support. It seems like it's trying to. This previous line that was a resistance that we eventually broke out of saw just a crazy run from Iron. It seems like it might be trying to hold this as a support. But if Bitcoin shows more weakness, of course, if Nvidia earnings doesn't impress, we might see a sell-off from the AI stocks. And with Bitcoin side, if we see Bitcoin sell off, we're going to see them sell off more. If we break this trend line, we're probably heading near that 200 MA, which is still in the mid 20s. We really haven't established any levels beside that. Of course, maybe we could try like around the 29 area. But to me, if Iron doesn't hold here, it needs to find a new support area between the 200 MA and its current price. I would love to see Iron get into oversold territory. It might not. It could always possibly get a bounce here along with the market. But buying Iron when oversold in hindsight was a fantastic buying opportunity. Last time it was oversold was $5, guys. Do you remember those days, or are you new? Buying around this time in hindsight was a great opportunity. Buying while Iron was oversold. This was back in March of 2025, April, when Bitcoin started seeing that nice uptrend. When all the Bitcoin miners started trending up, they hit their bottoms here when oversold. Similar story to what's going on possibly here. Another time Iron was oversold here was the $6 area. And really you'd have to go all the way back to the 2022 crypto winter when Iron was a measly dollar stock. If you tend to buy when oversold, these are great opportunities. If you tend to trim when overbought, usually in hindsight, they are great times to sell. Sometimes it goes higher, but at least you made your money. And it doesn't always have to be all or nothing. You can trim along the way. Just like accumulating during the bear market. You don't just try to snipe the absolute bottom and hope that that is the bottom. You accumulate when times are bad. You slowly accumulate and add in. Kind of like dipping into a pool. Some people just cannonball in. Some people slowly take the stairs down. Now, people are asking about Hive. I'm not really into Hive. It's looking pretty ugly. It's down almost 60% from its highs. At its best, it was about 4x from its crypto winter lows. Currently, it is roughly 127% from its crypto winter lows. Oof. You'll see that Hive saw a big reaction when it broke its 50 MA. It also saw a reaction when it didn't hold its previous resistance as a support. We kind of kept selling off. It's heading towards its 200 MA at 276. It doesn't seem to be finding a bottom yet. They reported earnings, unprofitable quarter, while most of the other Bitcoin miners, BT, CleanSpark, Iron were posting profitability. Hive is posting unprofitability. Hive is now oversold, so it has that going for it. It could become more oversold. I would look for what's going on here. Are we going to get a higher bounce on the RSI while the price goes lower? A bullish divergence possibly, so things can turn around, along with seeing maybe a bounce at the 200 MA on the daily, a bounce at this level here, this 263, which is right around the 200 MA. These are the things you want to be looking for. Hopefully you're taking profit while Hive was heavily overbought. In their upcoming earnings, they're guiding for a loss again. Keep an eye on patterns for Hive. It does tend to play them out. For example, you had this, I'd probably call it a broadening pattern or just an ascending support line. But, you see the reaction once we broke it. Used it as support up until it broke it, and you saw, more selling coming in. But yeah, how are you guys feeling about the Bitcoin miners? It seems things are starting to try to find a floor. Although in many circumstances, they're hitting new recent lows. Look for them to try to bottom out, establish a support, start seeing that RSI divergence on the daily, the 4-hour, etc. When these Bitcoin miners and cryptos you like start reaching heavily oversold on the daily, on the weekly, usually those are great opportunities to buy. When there's a lot of fear in the market, when people are feeling negative, when everyone's starting to get exhausted, just selling, giving up, throwing in the towel, it's always darkest before dawn. And honestly, these times are starting to feel kind of like that Mt. Gox sell-off when Bitcoin ran down to $50,000. People are calling for another bear market, calling for things to go so much lower. Usually the bull markets end on euphoria, not euphoria. Usually the bull markets end on euphoria, on greed. And I gotta say, we really didn't see that much of it. In some cases of some Bitcoin miners, we did see it with heavily overbought stocks, in some cases on RSI standpoints. But we didn't see that kind of final last leg up, that end of year rally. Of course, maybe I'm counting it out because we still have a month and almost a half. And it's possible that Bitcoin can flip on a dime, rally on that death cross, and see new all-time highs in that time frame. But I will be the first to say, I think it is now unlikely to see $150,000 Bitcoin. I wonder if Michael Saylor will too admit that possibility. But I will be the first to admit it. Maybe I'll be wrong. And I've been saying that. Maybe I'll be wrong. 150K would be nice to see by year end, but maybe we're not going to get there. Maybe we end up seeing 130 to 140. Maybe Bitcoin continues to show weakness and continues to give us some great buying opportunities. Because if we do continue to sell off into the end of the year, I do think you need to start taking advantage. And this could be one of the shortest bear markets in Bitcoin's history. And possibly also lowest drawdown. As you have seen in the cycles before it, you see the drawdowns get less bad. Goes from like an 80% drop to a 70% drop to 60% drops, so on and so forth, which also means diminished gains. But Bitcoin is definitely becoming less volatile, despite what people think. If you were around for past cycles, you'd say that these 30% drops were very commonplace, even more so, 50% drops even. Bitcoin this cycle pretty much has dropped 32% and recovered. We're roughly around there. Maybe we get our bounce. Maybe we rally to new all-time highs. Let me know what you guys think. How are you feeling about the Bitcoin miners right now? Do you think we're due for a bounce soon or for more pain, for more weakness? Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.